Now, this is a part of Allah's promise, as He said, "Inna nahnu nazzalna dhikra wa inna lahu lahafidhun." As Allah promised, indeed I have revealed the reminder, the Quran, and indeed I will preserve it. Allah preserved its text. He preserved its text in the written form, and He preserved it in the memorized form, because though the actual number that had memorized the whole Quran at the time of the Prophet ﷺ's death was someplace around 7, 10, 14, not a large number, in the subsequent years people started to memorize it more and more as the text was it was available, till it became thousands, till it became hundreds of thousands. Over the 1,400 years that have passed, then you're entering into the millions who have memorized the whole Quranic text from Fatiha to Nas. This cannot be said of any other religious text in the world. The Quran has been preserved in a way that no other text has been preserved. Now, a question arises. Why did Allah preserve the Quran in this way, and He didn't do the same for the other books of Revelation? It's a question that should be addressed. The point is that when Allah sent the earlier prophets, they were sent to particular places for particular periods of time, to particular people. Their job was to convey Allah's word to the people to whom they were sent. Transportation problems meant it wasn't possible to spread this all over the world. So they were limited to the areas that they were sent. Sometime after the prophets died, when changes took place, other prophets were sent. So Allah sent a series of prophets over the centuries, bringing people back to the original and correct beliefs. By the time that Prophet Muhammad ﷺ came, he came at a time when the world reached a point in its development where the revelation could be taken to the ends of the earth, to the vast majority of the known world. So Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was chosen by Allah to be the last of the prophets, and his revelation was to be the last of the revelations. So since there was no other prophet coming after him, it had to be preserved as no other message before him was preserved. So it is not that the Quran is superior to the Torah, because it's all Allah's word, but that the Torah was sent for a limited period of time, whereas the Quran was sent for the rest of time. As Prophet Musa was sent for a limited period of time, Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was sent to all humankind, as Allah said, وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَاكَ إِلَّا كَافَّةً لِلنَّاسِ بَشِيرًا وَنَذِيرًا وَلَكِنَّ أَكْثَرَ النَّاسِ لَا يَعْلَمُونَ. I have only sent you, Muhammad ﷺ, as a giver of glad tidings and a warner to all of humankind, but most humans don't understand. So the message of the Prophet ﷺ was a message to the whole of humankind. His revelation needed to be preserved as no other revelation was preserved. Furthermore, as we will look at in our coming sessions, the Quran was also the miracle of Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, and that miracle had to be preserved as proof of his prophethood. So this was also a point which made it necessary for his revelation to be preserved as no other revelation before was preserved. And that basically concludes the introduction here to the science of tafsir methodology. The Quran's collection is an historical event which Muslims should know, we shouldn't be afraid of. Its incidents confirm the revelation. It gives us certainty of the text, that we have something reliable in our hands. Western scholarship admits that the Quran has not been changed. Though they may not accept the prophethood of Muhammad ﷺ, at least those that are reliable admit that the text has remained unchanged over the last 1,400 years. And this is what is most important for us to understand. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, wassalatu wassalam ala Rasulil Kareem, wa ala alihi wa ashabihi, wa man istanna bi sunnati ila yawmiddin. All praise due to Allah. May Allah's peace and blessings be on the last Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and all those who follow the path of righteousness until the last day. The next topic from Usul al-Tafsir, we have completed the collection of the Quran. Next topic is the heading of, or referred to as, the Meccan and Medinan revelations. And please, give me your attention. Don't try to read whilst I'm presenting the material. Of course, this is what is the temptation. It's in your hand. You want to read. Okay. Perhaps it's better you didn't have the books. Anyway, whatever I'm saying is there in the book, but likely, as you'll see when you go back from what we've taken so far, about a third of the material is not in the book. Of course, what you will be responsible for your examination will be what's in the book. Okay? So don't worry, nothing is going to escape you. Anyway, the topic, Meccan and Medinan revelations. This addresses the external aspect on one hand and the internal aspect on the other. We talked about looking at the Quran externally as well as internally. Externally in terms of its structure, its makeup, its internal in terms of its contents. Mecca and Medina initially does address issues of external structure, but the majority of the subject addresses the content of the Quranic verses, that they have been divided into two main categories: the Meccan revelations and the Medinan revelations. And as we pointed out previously, the Quran was revealed over a period of 23 years. It was continuously being revealed. Much of the material of the Quran addressed particular issues which existed in the Muslim community at the time of the revelation. Issues and problems would arise, and Allah would reveal certain verses to deal with those problems. So a good portion of the Quran is situational. It's related to certain circumstances, situation which developed in time of Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. But at the same time, they have international relevance, because these same issues, these same problems are a normal part of human existence, human issues, social conditions, etc. These types of issues, arise and will continue to arise. Now, when we divide the Quranic revelations into Meccan and Medinan, basically what we're saying is that there's going to be certain qualities which are unique to Meccan verses and others which are unique to Medinan verses. Since the situation of Muslims in the Meccan period was different from the situations in the Medinan period, therefore there are going to be certain characteristics for which Medinan verses will be noted and others for which Meccan verses will be noted. Right? Now, what is meant by Meccan and Medinan? First and foremost, it's not limited just to verses revealed in Mecca, verses revealed in Medina. What Meccan verses represent is Quran revealed up until the point of the Hijrah. So whether the verses came in Ta'if, because Prophet Muhammad went to Ta'if, right, or Mina or other places outside of Mecca, it's all considered to be a part of the Meccan verses. And then those which are considered to be Medinan is everything after the Hijrah. Whether it is on the way to Medina, whether it is in Medina, or when Prophet Muhammad came back to Mecca for the last Hajj, went out to Mina or whatever, all those verses are all classified as Medinan verses, even though they may end up having been revealed in Mecca. So you're really talking about two periods of time as opposed to two locations, right? Meccan and Medinan. Now, as I said, the situation in Mecca is different from the situation in Medina. Therefore, the content of the verses, since we said that a good large percentage of the verses which are revealed did deal with the actual situations that Muslims were faced with, then it meant that since the situation was different in Mecca, they're going to have certain common features. Among them, the fact that Muslims in Mecca were new converts to Islam, just coming out of paganism. The verses focused on Tawheed, Aqidah, clarifying the correct Aqidah. In fact, the 13 years in Mecca was a school of Aqidah, laying the foundation. It's the foundation of Islam. It was the foundation which the Prophet Muhammad laid in the course of his own biography, his own lifestyle, his seerah. So the Quran addresses all those issues that we spoke about earlier in the day when we dealt with the usul of Aqidah. All these issues are there, clarifying who Allah is, control over all things, good and evil, being beyond His creation. All of these issues are there, laying that foundation. Secondly, because of the fact that Aqidah being the foundation, it is put into practice in Salah. Right? This is the practical implementation of Tawheed, of Aqidah. Therefore, it was necessary for Salah to be established there in the Meccan period. Of course, the Salah of the early Meccan period varied from the Salah as it eventually came to be practiced. There was changes which took place in the format of the Salah. The first chapter, complete chapter of the Quran to be revealed was what was it? Al-Fatiha. Iqra represents the first verses to be revealed, but it wasn't, the whole surah was not revealed then. The first complete surah to be revealed was the first surah of the Quran, what is now looked at as surah number 1, Al-Fatiha. Why? Because that is the core of Salah. So the Fatiha teaches the believers how to worship Allah, how to pray to Allah, how to address Allah. That a person, when he is going to pray, he doesn't just raise his hand and say, Allah, I need this, I want that, give me this. Which is the tendency for people, as we talked about, people turning to Allah when they want. So worship is just a one-way street. Allah is like the genie. I call on you when I need you. And so Allah teaches in Fatiha that this is not the correct etiquette. This is not how you approach Allah. The correct way to approach Allah is first to praise Him. This is the first. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Give thanks for whatever He has given you. This is teaching you. So you don't start calling for what you need, you forget that Allah has given you so much. You make these massive demands. Recognize first and foremost that Allah has blessed you. Praise Him, thank Him. Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim. Recognize His mercy in our lives. Maliki Yawmiddin, right? Maliki Yawmiddin. Recognize responsibility. Before you start asking, again, recognize one's responsibility. That one is going to be accountable. Maybe that thing you're asking for is something you don't want to be accountable for. So think about it. Allah is the owner of the Day of Judgment. Belief in the judgment. Then confirming that Allah is the only one that we're worshipping. We're not calling on anyone besides Him. And He's the only one from whom we seek help. After all of that, this is the etiquette. Now you ask. But again, Allah doesn't say just ask, give me. It is show us the straight path. This is the most important thing for us to ask Allah. Though our whole life, environment, circumstance drives us to want to ask for the material things, Allah teaches us that what is really the best for us is the spiritual things. So ask for the straight path. The one way. The sirat. Described as mustaqim. Prophet Muhammad said, I call to it. Allah has him saying that, Ad'u ila Allahi ala basira. I call to it with knowledge, with clarity. That same path which He drew in the line in the ground. And He drew all the other lines to either side, and He asked the companions, do you know what this is? They said, no, O Messenger of Allah. I said, that is the straight path. All these other lines represents the other paths, with a devil at the end of each one of them calling people to it, headed for hell. Yarhamukallah. And that straight path He also described as being the path which He is on and His companions are on. The way of the Salaf. That the only successful way is to be on the path of the Salaf. The righteous forefathers. That first 3 generations. The Sahaba, the Tabi'een, Tabi'een. Their understanding of Islam is the correct understanding. This approach to Islam is what is called Salafiyah. Salafiyah is not a group. Some people mistakenly think like you have the Ikhwan, they're a group. Jamaati Islami is a group. Jamaat Tabligh is another group. Hizb ut-Tahrir is another group. The Salafiyya is not a group. Though you may find groups that say we are the Salafis, and they have a group, and it's an exclusive group. If you don't toe their line as they see it, then, as one brother calls it, what was that thing again? Offtheminhaj.com. This is the approach. If you don't toe their line, so they have become a kind of an exclusivist group and they're attacking everybody else. But that is not Salafiyya. That's a group who claims Salafiyya, and their attitudes, they are very harsh with people in their words, and I just recently with brothers in Toronto informed me that Troid, they have given a fatwa on their website that it's not permissible for people who consider themselves to be Salafis to pray behind Hanafis and Tablighis. They're going to extremes. Things which the scholars who just finished dying would never consider telling people to do. Leading scholars who they, ascribe their views to, they're in one valley, as they say, and the scholars are in another valley. So that group is a group. Salafiyya is a methodology, and this is the way of the saved sect. Following that methodology, the understanding of the Quran and Sunnah that was held by the companions of the Prophet ﷺ, their students and all who followed that path. That is a methodology, not a group. Now, if a group of Muslims, for whatever reason, they group together to do certain things, to disseminate material, etc., and they ascribe themselves to that path and they're following that path, then yes, they're among Salafiyya. But the judgment ultimately is on individuals. Do they actually follow what they claim or not? Right? So the Salah, which was revealed in Mecca, as we said, was a Salah which was limited in the sense that the number of rak'at were different from what we know today. But it represented, as I said, the link between Tawheed and the implementation of Islam. Putting Tawheed into practice, it starts with Salah. And that's why Prophet ﷺ had said, on the Day of Judgment, the first thing Allah asks about is Salah. If a person's Salah is not in order, then the questions go no further. You have failed. We have failed. It's not like exams in high school or college. You can get a 50 in biology, you get a 80 in sociology, and so you get your average. As long as you're above 60, you made it. It doesn't work like that. Not with Salah, not with the pillars of Islam. If you blow Salah, everything else is gone. That's why the last words which the Prophet ﷺ said before he died was As-Salah, As-Salah. Those were his last two words. That's how critical, how important the Salah is. So there it is in Mecca. The only pillar of implementation from the pillars of Islam, besides Shahada, because of course Shahada has to be there for people to become Muslim. After that, fasting, zakah, hajj were not revealed. Not in the Meccan period. It was just Salah. Then you find the Meccan verses, they deal with the unseen world. Heaven and hell. People need to know about this. We need to know about Allah. We need to know about resurrection. We need to know about the consequence, what's going to happen at the end of this world. So that information is taught. Allah speaks about the process of resurrection. This is something that people doubted. Verses where Allah mentions them asking, after we've turned into dust and bones or just broken up into pieces, we're going to come back again? That's weird. Allah says, this is what they say. But for Allah to bring us back again is easier, if there was such a thing, than to have made us in the first place. It's much easier to remake something you made than to make it in the first place. So Allah used a bit of logic on them. Think about this. And Allah does address some of those who disbelieve, saying to them, Am khuliqu min ghayri shay'in am humul khaliqun. Did they create themselves, or were they created from nothingness, or did they create themselves? And it's either one or the other. Nothing cannot create something. That's common sense. And we surely didn't create ourselves. Although they like to claim, matter or mass was always there. It has no origin, no beginning in time. So it's self-perpetuating, eternal. They've given Allah's attributes to the world. This is ancient. You find some ancient Greeks expressing similar ideas, that the earth was always there. But of course, from a logical point of view, this doesn't work. Because if we say that the origins of this world is in infinity, right? You're gone back to infinity. It means that it will take an infinite amount of time to get to the present. No? That's right. If you go back to its origins are in infinity, it means from infinity to now will take an infinite amount of time, which means we would never get here. The fact that we're here is proof that this world had an origin, must have had an origin. So Allah throws it at them. You didn't create yourself. So then what? The only thing else is that you had to have been created by someone, not from nothing, because that doesn't work. And you didn't create yourself, so there had to be a God who created you. Then Allah in the Meccan verses also presents certain challenges to the people of Mecca in order to prove to the Quraysh that this Quran was from Allah. It came in a miraculous form, a form which they couldn't imitate. And Allah tantalized them, mocked them, by beginning some of the chapters with Alif Lam Mim, Taha, Sad, Qaf. I know some people have gone and given explanations for what these letters mean, but there are no explanations. Right? These letters have no meaning known to us. To Allah, Allah knows best. But to us, we don't know. But what is obvious is that for the Arab, this mode of writing was new. The use of single letters in verses of poetry was unknown in this way. They did use it at the end of verses. After saying something, they may throw in something at the end, like the verse قُلْتُ لَهَا قِفِي فَقَالَتْ لِي قَافٍ. I said to her, stop, and she said, Qaf. Qaf in Arabic, they understand that it means waqaft. I have stopped. So they use the letter Qaf. It can be understood in the context of what was said before. But now to start with that, this was not their methodology. So it was a mockery. Allah is mocking them. You make these poems that you love so much that you worship them. You hang them on the Kaaba in adoration and worship. Made from these same letters, we have now something which you cannot imitate. You can't do it. But it's made up of the same letters. This is the challenge. So, the challenge is there from the Meccan period. And it's a challenge which is carried right on through to the Medinan period. Allah also talks in the Meccan verses about the people of old. Because the people of Mecca, they had stories which had been handed down to them of ancient civilizations, etc., etc. The people of what they call Madain Salih, their structures were still there to the north of Medina. You go north there, you can see huge rocks, boulders, where homes are carved out of them. Graves are carved right into the rock. You can go in the homes with all the rooms and carved right into the rock. They call it the Nabatean civilization. You've got a lot more of it there in Jordan. So their trade routes took them through these areas. So Allah told them about these people. What happened to them? Why was their civilization destroyed? A civilization which they could see obviously was way beyond where they were. And the people of Arabia, what existed of their own buildings, etc., at that time in the 8th century, 7th century when the Quran was being revealed, it was nothing in comparison to these structures that they could see. Okay? So Allah spoke to them, used them as examples, calling them back to the worship of Allah and pointing out to them the consequence of not worshipping Allah as He deserves to be worshipped. What you also find there is that Allah makes mention of certain civilizations which were in myth and which early scholars, Western scholars, looking at the Quran, doubted. When Allah speaks of Iram Dhatil Imad, Iram, the civilization of Iram, they couldn't find any civilization there in Arabia known as Iram. When they look back to the records, held in ancient biblical type records, there's no mention of Iram there. So they said this is part of the fables and the mythology of Arabians, which has worked its way into the Quran. So you can see it's not really a book of revelation. No way. This is Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He's just sticking anything he heard in there, bits and pieces from here, there, everywhere. Then, a few years back, they ran across a city in Mesopotamia which they didn't know anything about. They thought that the cradle of civilization was that area between the Tigris Euphrates, the area of Mesopotamia there, and Egypt. These were the two major civilizations. Beyond them there were none. But farther to the north, in Syria, they came across in their research a civilization called Alba, which they had never heard of before. And they went in and they found records in ancient inscriptions known as cuneiform, which was also common in Mesopotamia. They found a library full of this stuff, describing their civilization, and it was a massive civilization on the same level as that of Mesopotamia, and they didn't know anything about it before. And when they were going through the records, they came across Iram. We didn't think this place existed at all. Reference is made there to Iram. So a couple of American geologists, they decided to try to find out where this place Iram was. And they started to do research in southern Arabia, in Yemen, and asking around. And the people had it in legend. They spoke about Iram. Exactly where it was, nobody really knew. So what they did was they got NASA, one of its satellites, making imagery through infrared photography of different areas, trying to discover where new oil deposits may be. They had them do some infrared photography of the region of southern Yemen, where the legend of Iram was most popular. And from that photography, they were able to see what seemed to be trails and tracks which were pointing to a particular place near the empty quarter of Arabia, connected to Yemen. And when they went there, because this was visible from the satellite, you couldn't see it on the ground, but from the way these had been routes, camel routes that had been going from different parts of Arabia, which seemed to converge at one point. So they went there, and it was just desert, and they began to dig there, and sure enough, they found the city of Iram under the sand, which had been hidden for thousands of years. It was not visible even in the time of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So here it is, the Quran spoke about the reality of cities which we only discovered how many thousands of years later. So in talking about the people of old, we also see some of the evidence that the Quran had to have been from Allah. Then we find the verses addressing issues of Iman. What is connected to Tawheed and Aqidah and Salah is Iman, the faith in general. This is what was the goal of understanding Allah and the human relationships with Him, which is our Aqidah, and putting it practically into implementation. This is our Salah, and the product of that is Iman. Right? Iman is a product of knowledge and practice. Knowledge and practice produces Iman. Unfortunately today, many people misunderstand knowledge and imagine that in fact knowledge is the same as Iman. But the reality is that knowledge is not the same as Iman. If knowledge was the same as Iman, Satan would be the biggest believer. Satan, who knew Allah better than you and I ever will in this life. Satan had knowledge. He was elevated by that knowledge to be amongst the angels, but that knowledge was not transformed into action to produce Iman. So when he was commanded to bow, he refused. So those people who have knowledge but don't implement it, we refer to this as satanic knowledge. Knowledge which becomes a curse. Knowledge which does not benefit but harms. And that's why Prophet Muhammad ﷺ used to say among his du'as, Allahumma inni a'udhu bika min ilmin la yanfa. Oh Allah, I seek refuge in you from knowledge which is of no benefit. Knowledge which I don't benefit from, which is of no benefit to me. Knowledge which is not beneficial because I don't apply it, as well as knowledge which is useless, which has no benefit in it. Because knowledge is for benefit, not for the sake of knowledge. A different approach to knowledge from the Islamic perspective. Knowledge is for the benefit, not just knowledge for the sake of knowledge. That's a very important distinction that we need to realize, because this is a society, Western society promotes the idea of knowledge for the sake of knowledge. They spend a lot of money trying to get knowledge for the sake of knowledge. They will spend $300 million to send a craft to Mars to collect up some dirt, to bring it back and have a look at it. Knowledge for the sake of knowledge. At the same time, you have over 3 million Americans who live in the streets of America. This is knowledge which is not being applied, not being used to benefit the citizens of America. You know, that is the consequence of knowledge for the sake of knowledge. Whereas from the Islamic perspective, as the Prophet ﷺ said, خَيْرُ النَّاسِ أَنْفَعُهُمْ لِلنَّاسِ. The best of people are those who are most beneficial to people. So it's about knowledge for the benefit which comes from it. So Islam stresses the link between faith, the principles of knowledge, and that of action, which we call the righteous deeds. And that from knowledge and righteous deeds you produce what? You produce Iman. So actually I didn't finish Surah Al-Fatiha, did I? I just come back to remind me. We had gotten as far as finding the straight path. And Allah goes on to, I'm bringing this because it's related to this too. He goes on to say, which is that straight path? The path of those on whom is your favor, right? Not the path of those on whom is your wrath, nor the path of those who have gone astray. غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. Now Prophet Muhammad ﷺ explained for us who are the maghdubi alayhim. He said they're the Jews. And the Dallin, he said they're the Christians. Why? The maghdubi alayhim, why is Allah's anger on them? Because they had knowledge of the book and they didn't practice it. As Allah said, أَتَأْمُرُونَ النَّاسَ بِالْبِرِّ وَتَنْسَوْنَ أَنفُسَكُمْ. You command people to righteousness and you forget yourselves. They had knowledge of the book, but they didn't practice it. So Allah's curse is on them. His anger is on them. Whereas the Christians, they are dallun. Right? Dallun meaning they have gone astray. They're lost. Why? Because they have no knowledge. They have no knowledge. So they're lost. Their religion is emotion. Remember we spoke about that earlier. Their whole religion is based on emotion. There's no knowledge there. It's just about getting the Spirit. So, however we can get that Spirit, we're ready to do it. Right? If it means bringing a rock band into the church and everybody is, at it and singing and clapping and dancing and all this kind of thing. You got the Spirit? That's all right. It's emotion. There's no knowledge there. No guidance. So, shaitan will make anything appear appealing to them. I know this is one of the things that struck a number of the brothers who accepted Islam, who with the American troops. When we took them into the masjid. because they had been told by the American officers, they've been told, listen, do not come within 50 feet of a mosque. So you don't walk within 50 feet. You got to stay 50 feet clear of these places. So of course it made them curious. What's going on inside there? So we took them. Said, what are you guys doing in the mosque? They told us don't come within 50 feet. Don't worry about it. There's nothing like that really. Islam, there's no problem. So we took them inside the masjid, took off their shoes, they sat in the back. Time for prayer came, we prayed, and they observed, and a number of them said, wow, man, this makes sense. After being in the churches back home where people, as I said, it's a disco. The church has become a disco, You say, how can you worship God? Hey, what's the difference between here and the disco? I said, this makes sense. This is what worship is supposed to be like. The place is quiet. You're reflecting on God. Everybody's doing the same thing. It really had an impact on many of them. Many of them accepted Islam just from going and sitting in the mosque and observing Muslims in prayer. So the point is that Allah, when He tells us that we should seek the straight path, not the path of the Jews and the Christians, not because we should point the finger of the Christians and the Jews. We say, we want to follow that straight path, we don't want to be a Christian or a Jew. No, that we don't want to fall into the trap that they fell into, that we don't want to be of those who have knowledge and don't implement it, that we don't want to be of those who are following religion and we have no knowledge of it, in ignorance. So this is what Allah informs us is the most important thing to strive for. And this is, as we said, the foundation for correct Iman. Because people can have faith in all kinds of things. The Hindu has faith in his gods. The Buddhists have faith in Buddha. The communists have faith in Marx. You can have faith in all kinds of things. But if your knowledge base is not correct, then your faith is wrong. Your faith is wrong. It's useless faith. It's a faith of misguidance. So your knowledge base has to be correct. But then, that's not enough. You have to implement it. You have to put it into practice. And when you do that, then you produce Iman, the real faith. And that's what we need to call for. We need to ask for. This is the most important thing that will make the ultimate difference in our lives. And this is what should come into our prayers. Now, the last point, which may be mentioned with regards to the Meccan verses, is a structural point. That the Meccan verses, if you look at them in general, they tend to be quite short. Some of them are only a couple of words. Very short. Inna a'tainaka al-Kawthar. Surah Al-Kawthar is only 3 verses long. Very short. Why? Because of the fact that the Quran was being revealed among a people who didn't want to hear it. They didn't want to hear it. They had been warned already. Don't listen to it. Muhammad ﷺ is a magician. When they couldn't reproduce it, instead of saying, well, okay, that's the evidence, he's got to be a messenger of Allah, they took the other out, right? He's a magician. His Quran will cast a spell on you. So don't listen to it. So people used to stick their ears in their fingers in their ears as they walked by his house. They didn't want to hear it. Don't let it get into your brain. You're finished. Right? So the Quranic verses would come, one word, Al-Qari'ah. Bam. What? Mal-Qari'ah. they're caught. They don't have time to get the finger in the ears. This is the point. To catch them, draw them in, and get that message to them. So the verses need to be short because they were directed at a people who were not prepared to listen. They didn't want to listen. They feared listening. So of necessity then, the verses tended to be very short. Now when we look at the Medinan verses, we find the Medinan verses have a different character. What is happening in Medina? Muslims have moved to a new city. They have established a community. In Mecca they were scattered. They were under torture. People were being killed for their faith. They were in a position of weakness. They couldn't even fight back. So no laws beyond Salah. But in Medina the community is now established. Prophet Muhammad ﷺ is made the head of state. A legal system has to be developed now to govern the state. Relationship with Jews are amongst them, and pagans. Treaties have to be made. On what basis these treaties have to be? So laws came. You find that the Medinan verses, all of your major laws are revealed there. All of the major laws are revealed in Medina. Meaning that in Mecca, Muslims drank alcohol. They ate pork. All these things were there. It's not until Medina that these things became prohibited. Also, the verses, of course, now deal with the people of the book. Because Medina, the city, was founded by whom? By the Jews. The Jewish tribes were the first to get there. They called it Yathrib. That's the original name of Medina. Medina is really a short form for Madinatul Rasul, the city of the Prophet. So Medina just really means city. It's not really a proper noun, but it has become a proper noun. So verses addressed the people of the book, the Christians and the Jews. What Muslim relationships will be with them? They couldn't marry the pagans, but they could marry among them. They could eat their slaughter, but they couldn't eat the slaughter of the pagans. These distinguishing factors. Then verses also clarified the errors, the mistakes, the deviations of the Christians and the Jews. Whether it is about Jesus, their misunderstandings, Allah clarifies that He was not the Son of Allah. He was not the third of three. Allah is one, and He was a prophet of Allah. And the Old Testament, the book, the Torah, the Psalms, these were distorted. Lies were told about the prophets. Allah clarified. No, Allah chose the prophets as examples of righteousness, not what the Bible has, where the Bible described the prophets committing the most heinous of crimes, from adultery to incest, gross crimes. Allah corrects this. Allah says they wrote the book with their own hands. They made changes in it. This is something the Jews didn't recognize until recently. And the Christians. Allah speaks about it 1,400 years ago.